Good morning, and thank you for joining the Colorado River Water Flow and Business Impact webinar. My name is Jody Williams of Holland and Hart, and I have been working in water law, and I've been studying Utah's water situation for most of my career. I'm pleased to moderate an excellent panel discussion today, where we are all going to learn more about the Colorado River and its impacts on the business community. I tell you what, we have got a star-studded cast today. We are joined by the three most knowledgeable, most important, and most professional Utahns on the Colorado River. Joel Ferry, Executive Director of the Utah Department of Natural Resources. Joel is appointed by the governor as the governor's representative to the Colorado River Authority of Utah, and he is the vice chair of the Colorado River Authority of Utah. We're going to learn more about them today. Joel is also a fifth-generation farmer near Corinne in Box Elder County. In addition to seeing the 1,400 employees, overseeing them, and 8 divisions and 2 offices within the Department of Natural Resources. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics and finance from Utah State. We also have Gene Shawcroft, Utah's Colorado River Commissioner and Chair of the Colorado River Authority of Utah. Gene Shawcroft is the face and the representative of Utah on the river. Gene grew up in Southern Colorado and he worked and played in water. You don't have time to play now though, I know. After graduating with a master's degree from BYU in civil engineering and spending some time working at the Division of Water Resources, which is now one of Joel's agencies, Gene joined the Central Utah Water Conservancy District and he was appointed general manager in 1991. In 2021, Gene was appointed by the governor as the Utah commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission. He works with the governor, the Colorado River Authority of Utah, the 6 basin states besides Utah on the river, and the federal government to use the best available data and management practices to make sure that Utah, along with the other 6 states and Mexico, can use their fair share of the Colorado River. And we are also very pleased to have Amy Haas. Amy has years of experience on the Colorado River, and she serves as the first executive director of the newly formed Colorado River Authority of Utah. Previously, Amy was executive director and general counsel for the Upper Colorado River Commission, of which Utah is a member. Before joining the commission's staff, Amy was both general counsel and acting director of the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, and she had served as New Mexico's Upper Colorado River Commissioner and the Colorado River Basin State's principal. Now, for those of you who are listening, I will tell you, you will never have a better opportunity to learn about the Colorado River and ask questions to these experts than you are having right now today. It should be a very informative session. If you have questions during the presentations, and I think you're going to have questions, jot them down or feel free to submit a question using the Q&A function. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can. And again, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Salt Lake Chamber website. Now, let's hear from our guests. Joel, I'm going to start off with you. What is the first thing that you want the Utah business community to know about the Colorado River?
Okay, thank you, Jody, and thank you for that nice introduction as well. It's really nice to be here with you and with the Chamber to be able to discuss the important issues impacting and affecting the Colorado River. What I would like the people, the business community and the people of Utah to know about the Colorado River is that the state of Utah is actively using and utilizing our allocation of Colorado River. So not just in eastern Utah, but through the Duchesne River and the Strawberry Reservoir and the Central Utah Project, we're bringing water through and putting it into through the Central Utah Project, putting it into be used here on the Wasatch Front as well. That water is being used for industry, for agriculture, and for our communities, both in Eastern Utah through Duchesne and Uinta counties, but also in Utah and Salt Lake counties, particularly Wasatch County and some of these other counties. And it's a main and a huge driver of economic activity. When you look at where a lot of the growth is occurring on the Wasatch Front, that growth is occurring principally because of our Colorado River water and the Central Utah Project. And so it's a great asset. We're actively pursuing to utilize that water, but also to use it wisely, instituting conservation measures, and ultimately being good stewards of that resource. Oh, Jody, I think you're muted.
I already made a mistake, see? Thanks. Jean, Joel's already referred to the Central Utah Project. So in addition to your duties as Utah's Colorado River Commissioner, you are the General Manager and CEO of the Central Utah Water Conservancy District, Utah's largest water provider, delivering Colorado River Project water. Jean, tell us about this. Is the CUP delivering Colorado River water now? And if so, who is using it? Where does it go? How does it get here? Who's using it?
That's a great question, Jody, and it's an honor to be with you and Amy and Joel. It's absolutely fascinating to talk about water and the complexities. But what I would tell you is Joel mentioned the Central Utah Project. Relatively speaking, that's a new project, even though it's been around for quite a while. In the late 30s, early 40s, the state of Utah, working with what's now called the Provo River Water Users Association, developed the Provo River Project. And that Provo River Project brings water from the Duchesne River through the Duchesne Tunnel above Camas. And that's one of the major sources to fill Deer Creek Reservoir. So that project has been in place since the 40s. The Central Utah Project started making deliveries in 1985. And so all of the growth, nearly all of the growth in Salt Lake County, Utah County, that has occurred since 1985 has occurred based on the back of the Central Utah or the Colorado River water. If you think about the water use in 1985 and think about that water use today, which is significantly more, nearly all of that increase, all the economic development, all of the housing, all of those things that Joel referred to have really occurred on the back of Colorado River water. And it's a literal delivery. We take water from the south slope of the Uinta Basin, the south slope of the Uintas, bring it through a collection system, about 35 miles into Strawberry Reservoir, and then from Strawberry Reservoir down Diamond Fork Canyon, and all the way into Salt Lake County. Part of that is we bring water to Utah Lakes so that we can store water in Jordanelle. So it's very, very complex. And that's all we care about, is making sure that people appreciate when they turn on their tap. There's a whole lot more involved than just simply turning on their tap. So I'll stop there because I know you've got some other great questions. So we'll go to that point. Jody, thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Turning a little bit closer here to the Colorado River Compact, which is in the news every single day and is actually pretty hard to understand. The Colorado River Compact turns 100 years old this year. Yet, if you actually read the Colorado River Compact, it's pretty hard to find in there just how much water Utah is entitled to. Can you just explain how much water Utah has the right to under the Colorado River Compact?
So
We'll
Jody,
let Amy answer that one.
I'll take the easy one, right? So first of all, thank you for the invitation today. And it's always a pleasure to speak on the same panel or virtual dais with Jean Shawcroft, who is the River Commissioner for the state of Utah and the Colorado River, and the chair of the authority, and Joel Ferry, who is the vice chair of the authority. So thank you for the invitation today. I'll take the easy part of the 22 compact, and then I'll turn it over to Jean for the difficult discussion. But to answer your question, under the 1922 Colorado River Compact, Utah does not have a specific right to use water. Rather, the upper basin as a whole collectively is given the right, the exclusive right, to use 7.5 million acre feet of Colorado River water per annum. Fast forward to 1948, another compact was negotiated and signed, and the framers at that point realized that allocating water, and in this case, amongst the upper division states of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming, and then Arizona gets a little piece of that as well because they fall within the upper basin, that it was not prudent given the hydrologic cycle to allocate water on a flat or on an absolute basis. And so the framers allocated various entitlements to the upper basin and the upper division states based on percentages. So under the 48 compact, Utah is entitled to 23% of the supply available to the upper basin. Again, not a fixed number. It's not 23% of 7.5 million acre feet necessarily, but it's 23% of the available supply. And this becomes doubly complicated when you consider the math problem that we've got on this river. 100 years ago, you mentioned the centennial of the Colorado River Compact. That compact obligated 17.5 million acre feet of Colorado River water for use in the upper and lower basins and by the Republic of Mexico. However, since 2000, what we call the current drought of record or the millennium drought, the average natural flow on the river has been 12.3 million acre feet. And this is, continues to decline as a result of protracted drought and the impacts of climate change. So it's a very complicated problem that we're dealing with. And this will all ultimately impact Utah's entitlement to this water.
You said you were taking the easy part?
Okay, now Jean can clean up any mess that I've made.
Jean, do you want to add to that?
Amy, as always, has done a fabulous job. I will just repeat what she said. Utah's allocation varies based on how much snow Mother Nature gives us. And Mother Nature's snowpack, we call the hydrology, which ranges from 22 million acre feet. Early years, 83, 84, it was near that. And in some cases, it's in the neighborhood of 10. So it's a huge change in quantities. And we'll probably have some other questions about that, but we do not just simply say we get X number of acre feet of water from the Colorado River every year.
Okay, then going on from there, if the Colorado River is a lot of it is being used, we hear on the news now that water deliveries from the Colorado River are going to be curtailed. We hear about curtailment all the time. So yet you're telling us that there's not 17.5 million acre feet of water and that it's already divided. Can you tell us about this curtailment and about the hydrological uncertainty that Utah and the other upper basin states already experience?
That's a great point, Jody, because for those who live in the lower basin states, they have two large reservoirs above them. And so they know exactly how much water is in the reservoir. They know exactly how to plan for the use they're going to get. And it's a certain amount, or has been over the years. With the reservoirs as low as they are, there are some reduced uses that are being forced upon the lower division states. But for the most part, they've had a clear understanding of how much water they had and how much water they could use. As we all know, in Utah, a person might have a right to 100 units of water, but the snowpack may only produce 50. And we don't have any idea until that water starts running how much is actually physically in the river. And so we have learned in the upper division states to use the water that Mother Nature has provided. And now over the last 20 years, it's been significantly less than average or than normal. And so we've grown accustomed to having to juggle our use based on what is actually in the river. Now, curtailment has a different connotation in that if we're unable to deliver our 7.5 million acre feet per year to the lower division states, and we're using too much water to do that, then curtailment requires that we use less. Curtailment has not occurred, may not occur, but what is occurring is not the technical word of curtailment on the river, but simply reduced use because the water hasn't physically been available in the system to use.
So Jean and Amy and I just returned from a major Colorado River summit with the other 6 Colorado River Basin states, Mexico, and the Native American tribes that have an allocation of Colorado River water. But it sounds like more and more groups want a share of Colorado River water. And of course, we have so many more people living and businesses being formed in the Colorado Basin. With this 23-year mega drought, which is what people are calling it, how much water are the hydrologists projecting that the Colorado River will produce?
Amy, do you want to take a crack at that one?
You know, I'll start it out. Jody, this is a very difficult question because it really depends on the various hydrologies and the ensembles that you use to measure available water supply. And we're just prognosticating at this point, right? I think my concern, and just speaking on behalf of myself, is we get into discussions regarding the post-2026 operation of the river. Right, we're currently subject to operational criteria that will expire then, that we are not wedded to a particular hydrology, whether it's between 9 and 11. I just mentioned that the average, annual natural flows over the last 23 years have been 12.3 million acre feet. My concern is that we don't tie ourselves to a particular hydrology. We begin to chase that hydrology. What we need, in my opinion, to manage this river effectively are adaptable criteria that can adapt to the absolute worst case hydrology, but then better case hydrology. I think that was one of the, in retrospect, we can say one of the oversights of the current criteria on the river is that we really picked a particular hydrology. And I think we need to get away from that. We have seen, I mentioned the 12.3 million acre foot, per annum average natural flow. In water year 2021, the average flow for that year was somewhere on the order of 6.3 million acre feet. So you just see the variability. This is the Mother Nature's work, as Jean mentioned. So we've got to be prepared to adapt to myriad hydrologies, not a particular band or one number.
Jody, can I just jump in? And since we have the opportunity to be visiting with the business community, one of the things that I would really plead with your help with is helping us lower our demands. We can't control, to Amy's point, we can't control Mother Nature. We don't know if she's going to provide 6.3 million acre feet or 22. But what we can do is we can control our demands. We can control how much water we use. And Utah gets a bad rap for using too much water. Part of that is maybe deserved, but the majority of it isn't. Whether it is or isn't, we need to be in a situation where we use less water. And we know we're growing. We know we're going to continue to grow. Our water supply isn't going to grow at the same rate that our population is going to grow. The only way we can continue to grow is if we use less. And I would implore the business community to work with us to find ways in all sectors, residential, commercial, business, agriculture, in all sectors, to reduce our use in a way that we can be more efficient and yet still allow us to have water to grow. So I'll just put in that shameless plug and request of the business community.
I think that's really helpful for us to concentrate on, Jean. We just can't, we don't have any more water, but we have to use it more wisely. And that's also going to call for infrastructure development and replacement, I think, isn't it, Jean?
Yes, yes, we certainly, we have a report that the Prep 60 group has put together that indicates over the next 50, 60 years, we're going to need about $38 billion to maintain what we have, to develop new, and to pay for conservation. Conservation comes at a price. No matter what we do in the conservation arena, it has a price to it. And so there will be new infrastructure, there will be rehabilitation of existing infrastructure, and there will be expenses associated with conservation, all of which will need to be done in order for us to maintain a viable water supply into the future.
Thank you. Joel, Jean has just been talking to us, and in his last answer, I heard him mention conservation 3 times. Now, we hear over and over, I'm asking you this as the executive director of the Department of Natural Resources, and also as a 5th generation farmer. We hear over and over that agriculture uses the largest amount of water, but agriculture is a major Utah business sector, and it has large multipliers for the positive impacts it puts into Utah's economy. So what are the plans within the Department of Natural Resources, first, to implement conservation projects, and then let's go back and I'll ask you about ag and what it can do to conserve. But talk to us about your agencies and their missions of conservation.
Okay, thank you, Jody. And great question. And I really think that we have to, at its core, look at conservation is a development tool. And it has to be, it's going to require significant investment, and it has to be the way that we pursue, development and growth in the future. That will provide, conservation will provide significant amount of water for the state of Utah to continue to grow and develop. Now, specifically, what are we doing on the conservation front? This last year, the legislature passed historic legislation to give us tools necessary so that we could implement large-scale conservation programs. And both in the Colorado River system, which is our discussion today, but also when we talk about on the Wasatch Front, a really pressing concern is Great Salt Lake. And so I like to say that today we have a toolbox full of really sharp tools, and it's time for us to put them to work. Putting them to work means that we've got to make investment. We need additional funding and additional resources to be able to kind of supercharge these conservation efforts that we're utilizing. Things like the secondary meter program. That program alone, we estimate, is going to save about 65,000 acre feet of water a year, specifically in our municipal and industrial sectors. That's a huge amount of water. Through a fairly large investment, the legislature invested $250 million to help supplement that program, so that our secondary systems, which is the outside irrigation for most of the Wasatch Front, that those areas could be metered and measured. And what we've seen is just that one effort alone is a reduction in demand by 20 to 30% for every connection that's metered. We have a turf buyback program. We funded $5 million into that last year, and that will help us provide and swap out inefficient turf, non-functional turf into a more water-wise landscape in our residential and commercial areas. Other conservation efforts that we're doing, we've instituted that water in planning as our cities grow, both in the commercial and in the residential side, the water has to be a critical element of those plans and those growth factors. When we consider where we're growing and how we're growing, we have to recognize that there is a limited amount of water. And so we are encouraging, incentivizing our cities and our communities to institute water-wise landscaping requirements and to just factor in the amount of water available to our cities for that growth. Now, we also have, specific to Great Salt Lake, we created a water trust this last year. And what we're looking at doing is having the ability to dedicate water. One of the tools that we enabled was now we have the ability to, we've kind of flipped the historic use it or lose it mentality that has existed in water law on its head to say, leaving water in a natural system now can receive a beneficial use. And that's a significant change. And what we're seeing is, what we're going to see is the ability for companies, people, farmers, whomever has a water right, the ability to leave that water right in the natural system to go down to the Great Salt Lake to stay in. They could do it in the Colorado system too. This is a statewide program, and significant benefit from doing that. And agriculture. Do you want me to go there, Jody? Do you want to talk about that now? Because
Sure.
that truly is, as you said, agriculture uses a vast majority of the water in the state. I'm a 5th generation farmer and rancher, as you mentioned. I grew up, we flood irrigate our fields. We implement, we grow corn and wheat and hay and all these crops for cattle production. And agriculture is a vital business for our state. I like to say that, when you have plenty to eat, you have a lot of problems, right? And when you're hungry, when you have nothing to eat, you have one problem: you're hungry. And so food is critical. Every one of us needs food to survive. And we've seen in the COVID pandemic breakdown of the supply chain, because a lot of people will say, oh, we can just import our food from somewhere else, from California or from foreign countries. And we can. There's a lot of food that we get today that's imported. But what we want is we want a core production of food locally grown. And there's something really wholesome and good about community and that well-being of being able to go to a farmer's market and buy fresh tomatoes, or going up in the fruitway and where I'm from, up in Brigham City, and buy peaches, from the off Highway 89 there. I mean, it's just a fantastic thing, and it's a quality of life that I think we can all appreciate. And so agriculture plays a really critical role, not just from it's business and the amount of it adds to our GDP and the multipliers that exist from agriculture, but also from a quality of life, from the open space. And so what we're trying to do is we recognize that agriculture uses about statewide, it's about 75 to 80% of the water that's diverted. On the Wasatch Front, it's less; it's closer to 65%. But in the state of Utah, a couple of years ago we created a water optimization task force, and then also a water optimization fund. So rather than just say it's conservation, agriculture, use less water, what we're saying is let's use our water in a smarter way. Let's optimize our water. And so what that means is by installation of water efficient sprinkler systems, center pivots, lining and piping of canals, putting in drip irrigation systems. All of those things have a huge positive impact on the demand and the amount of water that agriculture needs. And you're talking in the neighborhood of 20, 30, 40% reductions in demand, but still being able to produce the same amount, if not more, crops. Because by utilizing the water efficiently and effectively, you're seeing multiplier effects in crop production as well. And so getting the plant the water it needs when it needs it is so critical, and you boost yields. And so agriculture is seeing the benefit from that. This last year, the state of Utah we invested and we made appropriation of $70 million towards the Ag Water Optimization Fund. This is a statewide program. The demand in that program was so huge that the fund has been essentially exhausted already in just the first 6 months. And it has a multiplier effect there. Every dollar, what we've seen is every dollar that the state has invested in that, there's been a 4-to-1 match from private or federal money coming in to help support that program. So when we talk about $70 million from the state that's invested, there's an additional $280 million that's invested from outside sources. So you're talking about huge, huge investment, huge need and huge demand. And I think that's an area that we can really continue to invest as a state and look for continued growth and continued benefit, because really, like I said before, this is the low hanging fruit that exists when we talk about water conservation and spreading our water a little bit further and being able to become drought resilient. You know, one of the biggest benefits I think that agriculture provides is agriculture is a very drought resilient industry, and we're very flexible. So when you have the signals, we have a low snowpack. Amy talked about some of the flows in the Colorado River fluctuating from 6.5 million up to 20 million acre feet a year. I mean, that's a huge, huge fluctuation. And so agriculture has the ability to be flexible. It's not a hardened demand. And so one year we can grow wheat, the next year we can go fallow, or the next year we can grow hay or corn. And so you have this flexibility to increase or decrease demand in agriculture. And it plays a really critical factor to take some of the hardened demand when it goes into municipal or industrial use, where that demand is hardened. You know, when someone goes to their tap, they want the water to flow. And in agriculture, we can go and say, hey, we recognize the snowpack's less, we're going to grow less, but we can still survive and get through it and still provide that important benefit to our rural communities throughout the state. And so what we're seeing is significant water savings in agriculture. I think that there's still a lot of opportunity. One of the estimates was that the demand statewide, or the need statewide, was in the $4 to $5 billion range of optimization need. And so we're just really scratching the surface right now. But ultimately, I think that as we progress down this path, agriculture is showing that they're a willing participant, and that opportunities will continue to exist to optimize the water, to reduce demand, and make that water available to the natural environment, to our cities to grow, and to our industries to grow, as well as to sustain agriculture. There's a lot of really neat things happening there.
Thank you. Now I'm going to go back to you, Jean. We've talked about conservation. We've talked about conservation in agriculture and how that provides a new increment of usable water for the hardened uses, the municipal and industrial. How are we going to keep growing? I mean, how do we grow and use less water? Is it only just going to be agricultural conservation? There's got to be something that everyone can do. You talked a little bit earlier about businesses. Businesses have a part in this, right?
Absolutely. I think the thing that sometimes we lose track of is there are an infinite number of drops of water. And even though my drop might not be very much, if my drop gets added to 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 other people's drop, it turns out to be a lot of water. And I live in a neighborhood where folks typically set a timer, and the water runs every second or third day, and they turn it on in May and turn it off in October, November. That's just not something we can continue to do. We've got to be in a situation where we use the water based on what our plants need. Just like Joel talks about a certain amount of water for crops, our lawn is if we consider our lawn a crop, we don't have to put more water on it than it needs. And that's one of those things that we can do without doing any cost, anything at all, is just simply use less water. If we turn our timers off so that they run twice a week, is really all we even need in the middle of the summer. And so even though a business, the physical business, might only have a little bit of water use, that business can do a lot to incentivize and to educate its employees on how they can do conservation at home. And all of the state of Utah, the Division of Water Resources, the Water Conservancy districts, all have conservation programs with incentives to do certain things. As Director Ferry mentioned, this year we, for the first time, have a statewide turf removal program. And so people can apply and can get paid to take out their grass and put in something that's still nice, still wonderful, trees, etc. So there's ground cover, all of those things, but yet use, in some cases, 70% less water. And I would encourage all of the businesses to work with their employees and with their circles of influence to pursue these conservation programs and help us collectively add those drops of water across the state so that every drop saved is a drop that can go to new growth, new development, or frankly can stay in the streams for environmental purposes. So there are a ton of reasons for us to use our water more wisely. And it's just being conscious of how much water we actually use. That goes a long way to being wise about how we appreciate and value water.
A few years ago, I was involved in a group that consisted of really major water users like Coca-Cola, MGM Grand, and they were promoting water audits for businesses. And some of the large accounting firms had identified water supply as a critical business risk. So I think we are still seeing businesses looking at how they can be more efficient in their internal processes of water use as well. It's not just Coca-Cola or MGM. I know some of my clients look very carefully at how much water they're taking in, how much water is remaining after their business processes, and they're looking carefully at how can we tighten that up? How can we be more efficient? I'm sure that you see that too, Joel and Jean.
Yeah, absolutely. Water audits are an incredible resource. Again, that can be a small savings or a large savings, and water audit can be everything from putting out cups to see how much water we put on our lawns and how we can be more efficient, to an industrial entity that could do a water audit to determine how they can use less water. There are new methodologies being developed for some of our technology sectors that use water for cooling. There are air cooling systems now that have been developed. To this point, they're a little more expensive, but at some point in time, we've got to recognize the value of water. And if we can implement something more expensive today that allows us to continue to grow and develop, I would say that's a wise investment. And so we need to consider those. So water audits, I stretch to think how Coca-Cola's water audit might be like someone's water audit on their lawn. And they're not even similar, but the concept is the same. What can we do to fill our function, complete our business, grow and develop, and yet still at the same time be conscious of and use less water?
Thank you. Now, Joel, I'm going to come back to you here, talk about a little bit of state policy and state funding. The recently passed bipartisan infrastructure law appropriated $8.3 billion to address water and drought challenges and invest in our nation's Western water and power infrastructure. And then we had recently the Inflation Reduction Act, which appropriated $4 billion in funding specifically for water management and conservation efforts in the Colorado River Basin, and for ecosystem and habitat restoration projects to address issues directly caused by, I like this is a quote, directly caused by a drought in a river basin or an inland water body. So big hint, is Utah going going to attempt to acquire any of this funding?
Yeah, Jody, that's a great question. Absolutely, we are. And we've seen some of the results from that. So just from I'll start with the infrastructure bill. We get reports almost on a weekly or a monthly basis about different communities that have received some funding from the infrastructure bill. We've seen, significant investment from the federal government in, especially in some areas that are impacted by the Central Utah project, that are covered by the Central Utah project. I think just last week I saw Provo City received a big aquifer storage and recovery fund to help them with some of the troubles that they're having with their aquifer down there. But specifically, when you talk about Utah's efforts, and actively today, we're working with our federal delegation almost on a daily basis to come up with some broader statewide programs and policies that we'd like to see implemented from a funding standpoint. Like I said before, we have a really good toolbox. We have really good base level conservation programs. What we're lacking is some funding for them. We have huge need and huge demand, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of demand, if not billions of dollars worth of demand in these conservation efforts. And so there's a really neat tie-in with that. The Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed, as you mentioned, it talks about the inland water bodies that are being impacted by drought. And that's a direct tie-in to Great Salt Lake. And so we're in direct communication and contact with Bureau of Reclamation, who has been charged with overseeing these funds. And as a state, we're coming up with a statewide strategy to bring that money to Utah to help us supplement the funding that we are committed to as a state to spend, but to support and also to support these conservation programs like the Ag Water Optimization Program, like our turf buyback, like our some conservation measures. In addition, there's been proven methods, especially specifically on the Colorado, things like system conservation, where if we need that quick, immediate impact, we can go to some of our agriculture partners and say, let us offset the cost. If you'll fallow your ground on a few fields for 1 year temporarily, let us help offset the cost and pay you to do that. And that water will stay in the river system and get down to help offset some of the impacts of this drought. And so there's a broad array of tools that we're using, but we are actively, like I said, we're actively working with our federal partners and federal agencies to bring that money to Utah so that we can really ramp up and supercharge our efforts on a state level. And I think that, depending on what the outcomes are, but there's a really, really big potential to help us. Right now, one of our biggest priorities, again, I know we talked about this is, Colorado River discussion, but Great Salt Lake has to be on the minds of every Utahn, especially here on the Wasatch Front and Salt Lake Valley. And this is a Salt Lake Chamber event. I just want the chamber to know that we're actively working on finding solutions for Great Salt Lake, getting creative to help offset the potential impacts that's going to have on our communities. It's a top priority. It's our number one priority. And we're working again with our federal partners to try to make it get good positive outcomes and hopefully offset the impacts of this really, really extreme drought that we're experiencing.
Okay, I've got one more question here before we turn to our audience. At the beginning, we talked a little bit about the Colorado River Authority of Utah. So here we have the chair, the vice chair, and the executive director of the Colorado River Authority of Utah. Jean, what is it? And why is it more than just another bureaucratic agency? How did it get created? What does it do? What are its goals?
Thank you, Jody. That's a great question because there is a lot of confusion about another state agency, if you will. First of all, I would tell you it's not your typical state agency. Several years ago, about a year and a half ago, it was obvious to us, the state of Utah, with regards to our involvement in Colorado River, we needed to significantly up our game. With the hydrology declining, with growth occurring, it was obvious that we needed to have the ability to better understand Utah's use of the Colorado River, the priority for our use, and there just simply wasn't enough resource committed to that to make that happen. So the legislature in the 2021 session created the Colorado River Authority of Utah. There are directors from geographic regions of the state. And one of Joel's responsibilities is to cover the areas that aren't covered specifically by a geographical area. And that authority then had the opportunity to hire employees. And so that Amy was the first employee hired as the executive director. She has since hired 3 or 4 other folks. It's a small group, but they spend 24/7 plus on Colorado River issues. So the state of Utah now has resources, not only human resources, but the legislature appropriated $17 million over the last 2 sessions for us to better understand how we use our water, how we measure our water, how much water goes back to the river, how we understand policy, legislation across the basin, so that we are positioned and poised to make sure we have the opportunity to use our fair share of the Colorado River. Without understanding all of those things, there was a potential, and I'll leave it at that word, a potential that we would not be in a position to equally compete with the other states for their fair share of the river. And there was a potential that we would not be able to use our appropriate amount of water from the Colorado River. With these new resources available, that will not be the case. We are leading out in many areas that other states have historically led out. And Amy and her group have done an absolutely incredible job of making sure that Utah is at every table that we need to be at to make sure we've got our voices heard and our concepts presented. So we're in a much, much better position than we were because of the resources that have been committed. Amy, you ought to chime in a little bit because you're making the day-to-day workings of this go, and you probably ought to touch on the management plan that you've put together.
That sounds great, Gene. And Gene covered it well, but a couple of kind of additional thoughts. First of all, there is no corollary to the Colorado River Authority of Utah in the Upper Basin. I mean, we are really kind of a unique animal. And again, I think this goes to the legislature putting a premium in 2021 on Utah's interest in the Colorado River resource. Our statutory mandate is very broad: protect, conserve, use, and develop Utah's Colorado River system water. As Gene mentioned, we've, in the last 14, 16 months, we've been standing up, creating capacity here. I want to thank Director Ferry. We worked very closely with his team at DNR, particularly the Division of Water Resources and Division of Water Rights. So we are the new kid on the block in terms of water entities in the state of Utah, but we're kind of finding a foothold here. One of the many kind of activities that we've undertaken in our very short duration has been the development of a 5-year management plan. This is a pretty ambitious plan that basically charts our priorities, the authority's priorities, and Utah's Colorado River priorities 5 years into the future. And the management plan is really designed around 3 essential elements: measurement of our uses, understanding measurement. There's a lot that goes into that. What Director Ferry has said on numerous occasions, you can't manage what you can't measure. I think we truly believe that. So we're trying to build our capacity there. We're focusing on hydrology and operations and modeling. Modeling is a critical component. We model a lot on this river. We need to be using state-of-the-art models and modeling tools to, just to enhance our knowledge in terms of available supply and projected supply in light of all these different hydrologies that we discussed earlier. And then the third and final point, not to be underestimated, is drought mitigation. Director Ferry talked about ag efficiency and system conservation. That all folds into that third category. So I think we have posted a link to our website here. And I would encourage folks that are interested in learning more about our management plan to go to our website, pull up the management plan, and importantly, pull up the FY 2023 work plan, which implements the management plan on an annual basis. And that provides a certain level of detail in terms of how we're implementing the plan on a year-to-year basis throughout its 5-year life. I'm going to pivot for a minute and talk a little bit more about the board. You know, there has been breaking news in the last couple of days that Governor Cox, or let me take a step back. This session, during this regular legislative session, the legislature created an additional seat on the authority board. This is a seat for a member of a Utah Upper Colorado River Basin tribe. And Governor Cox just made an appointment to Paul Sosi, who is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. He will fulfill that tribal seat on the board. We're very excited to have Paul join us. His first meeting will be this month. It will be baptism by fire, as so many things are on the river. And then the other thing that the legislature did is created a provision for government to government discussions between the authority and Utah's Colorado River tribes on topics involving Utah's Colorado River allocation. So again, the thinking, you know, continues on this. I think that the legislature and the governor really made tribal engagement a priority, and we're excited, and we're very supportive of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy and Jean. And just to our listening audience, I want you to know that no other state has this kind of opportunity for tribal participation. So Utah is really blazing the trail, not just with the creation of the authority, but also by creating a seat at the table for tribal representative. Okay, it looks like we may have a question. Do we have a question?
We do. And I'm going to chime in and read the question, but I also want to thank you all. I came into this webinar a little bit worried and stressed, and it sounds like there's plans and resources and opportunities for the state going forward. And I think this webinar has presented a light of hope. So thank you. So the question is, as we take grass and other vegetation as well as ag crops out of production, replacing them with xeriscapes such as gravel, concrete, rooftops, asphalt, etc., doesn't that add to the heating of the atmosphere? In other words, doesn't vegetation contribute to the cooling of the environment? And is there a negative trade-off here? So I'm not sure who wants to take that on. Maybe Joel, this one's for you.
Sure, I'm happy to take that on, Ginger, and thank you. And I appreciate your comments. We do have a plan, and we are working, you know, towards that plan to come up with positive solutions. But so on that question, that's a really interesting question that people have raised. And yes, while you know what we're looking at is not necessarily saying we're going to replace all the non-functional turf and just have asphalt, right? That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is water-wise landscaping. You can go down to one of the district offices. They have examples of the shrubbery and the trees and the different flowers and different things that are very, very water-wise. So we're not just talking about xeriscape where it's all gravel and that kind of thing. It's really just modifying the way that we're managing our landscapes in an effort to say, because you know, that there's other plants that can survive in these desert climates that provide shade, and they can, you know, keep your yard cool and do those kind of things. And so, you know, I like to say that every action has a reaction. So nothing's perfect, but I think ultimately what we're looking at is, you know, the broader purpose is, if we're trying to grow grass to keep our climate cool, we're missing the boat, right? That's not the purpose of turf grass. And so we need to have that balance. We need to look at the bigger picture and kind of take a holistic look at how are we managing the resource, and are we doing it in a way that's sustainable long term, beneficial to the people of Utah, but also something that's sustainable for agriculture as well. And again, not talking about tearing out farm fields and putting asphalt down necessarily, but we're looking at maybe there's different crop species and types that are more water efficient. The delivery systems, certainly we have lots of room for improvement there, and that's what we're instituting, and that's where agriculture really is doing its part. I mean, they're on board with this, and just recognizing the limitations to this resource. So.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. We also have another question that just popped into the chat. What plans are being developed for Lake Powell? It has multi-purpose use of water for power and agriculture, recreation, etc. Are there plans in place that you can speak to? Maybe that was one for maybe Amy.
Well, I was going to volunteer Jean for that one, but I can take a stab at that and pass it over to Jean. Given the critical elevations at Lake Powell, I mean, there has been a laser focus on how we shore up some of these critical elevations at Powell. We are on the verge of hitting what we call minimum power pool, whereby power production ceases at a particular elevation. I think we're about 15 feet above it right now. As a consequence, there are actions happening in the upper basin involving releases from major reservoirs, including our own Flaming Gorge, and also actions that the Secretary of Interior has taken to hold back water at Lake Powell, right, to shore up these elevations. So that is becoming one of the front and center items, I think, in terms of Colorado River management. The Commissioner of Reclamation, Camille Touton, just, this summer gave the 7 basin states 60 days to come up with a plan to reduce use between 2 and 4 million acre feet on the river. And that was in direct response to these declining elevations at Lakes Mead and Powell. They are collectively about 25% of capacity. So in terms of the participants' question, there is a lot going on at Lake Powell in terms of stabilizing critical elevations, not just for recreation, but critically for power production. And then when we get below power production, there is always the specter of hitting dead pool, whereby we just can't get water out of the lake. So Jean, I'll pass it to you.
No, Amy's done a good job. Practically speaking, there are about 20 feet of water in Lake Powell that otherwise would not have been there but for these actions. Flaming Gorge is about 15 feet lower than it would have been had we not done one of these actions. So as to Joel's point of action versus reaction, we can take action to get more water in Lake Powell, but the reaction is we bring it from someplace. And over the last 2 years, about 600,000 acre feet of water has come from Flaming Gorge into Lake Powell to help prop it up. There is tremendous concern about the ability, as Amy mentioned, to continue to deliver water downstream and also to generate power. The Western US relies heavily on power production from Glen Canyon, and that's a major concern. But we are watching that. We're doing what we can. What we really need is Mother Nature to provide some really wet years. But if that doesn't happen, we still have plans in place to protect Lake Powell for a couple of more years. If we continue to get this 6 million acre foot hydrology, there will be some actions taken that will be very, very difficult and very controversial. But we've got to do what we can to protect those elevations in Lake Powell.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think Ginger's on mute. There we go.
I was on mute. I pulled a rookie move. Thank you, Jody. We did have one more question, and I think we're out of time, but basically the question was, how do businesses help? And I think that's what the purpose of this webinar is. If you can just add a capstone thought, that would be helpful, and then I'll just chime off.
Joel, go ahead.
Sure. Really quick. I think businesses can help by recognizing and implementing these water conservation measures in your own, in your own space. It shouldn't take the force of government or some broad mandate to compel our businesses and the people of Utah to conserve and to recognize that we are in this together. Truly, this is a community effort. And I love the idea of audits, but I also love the idea that, we have an opportunity here with for example, with the water trust, that businesses can help offset and mitigate the impact that they're having to the water systems here in the state by making investment and donating and doing things to help offset and mitigate their water use. And so there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of things we can do. Just be mindful of our water use. I think it needs to be on our minds daily, and we can overcome these problems. So.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much. I told you at the beginning, this would be a great panel, and it certainly was. Thank you, Joel, Jean, Amy, for your participation. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. As a reminder, this webinar will be posted on the Salt Lake Chamber website. So thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll sign off.
Thank you.